Now, the reason for this program today is because the United States Congress is considering the renewal of aid to UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, after it was cut off exactly 3 years ago by the U.S. The question will be under what conditions. Our agency over the years has been raising questions about the situation of education in UNRWA, the message that children are receiving in UNRWA, and we'll be introducing perhaps the most important and serious expert on the subject, Dr. Arnon Gross, because many of the congressional staffers said this week they're going to be busy dealing with issues having to do with Afghanistan. Many can't come today, so we're going to make this video available for Congress, and a week from today, we're going to have a follow-up video, a follow-up Zoom conference on the subject of U.S.-UNRWA accord that was signed on July 14th, and the week after that, we'll determine the date. We'll have another showing of the film you're about to see. The film you're about to see was filmed in the early part of August over a period of 2 weeks of basically the summer camps that UNRWA children are going to, and the kind of orientation they're getting before starting the school year, which basically begins next week. So let's take a look at this film and understand the implications for what it means to have a school year begin after 30,000 children, or going from the age of 10 to the age of 16 or 17, going through military training in camps that are run by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, two organizations recognized by the United States as terrorist organizations, which dominate the UNRWA Workers Union and the Workers Teachers Union. Let's see the film. Thank you.
Hamas and Islamic Jihad Summer Camps 2021. The way children from UNRWA schools spent their summer vacation.
مخيم طلائع التحرير سيف القدس للعام 2021. الله أكبر ولله الحمد.
واحنا جيل فلسطين احنا بنعشق الشهادة.
والله احنا بنجاهد عشان القدس وعشان وطننا ونموت شهداء.
هاي جيل التحرير، بنحرر فلسطين والقدس وكل الدول المحتلة.
جاي اتدرب عشان احارب اليهود لما اكبر وندافع عن القدس وعن فلسطين.
نتدرب ونستعد لأي حرب جاية، لأن نحن الجيل الجديد الذي يعود لأرضه وسنحرر الأقصى بإذن الله.
As the world has witnessed every year over the past decade, UNRWA students, even those who have not yet finished elementary school, are lured to participate in summer camps for armed guerrilla warfare. Allah! Allah! These children, who should expect UNRWA to provide a normal summer vacation environment, fall prey to terror groups that lurk everywhere, or are sent to these programs by their own parents. This summer, armed operatives signed up tens of thousands of UNRWA students ages 10 to 17 for summer camps offering extensive military training. Recruitment took place in mosques and at registration tables throughout the Gaza Strip.
إن صراعنا مع عدونا هو صراع على الجيل، ومن يكسب الجيل في النهاية يكسب المعركة.
دربونا شوية نتعامل مع التيس الشرس النتنياهو ونفتالي بنات وحط القملة على البرغوث ونفتالي بنات يا رب يموت.
دستوركم سبيلكم النار.
At terrorist bases belonging to Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the youngsters experienced intense military discipline and systematic indoctrination with one objective in mind: to fight and die for jihad and to annihilate the Jewish state.
احنا جيل التحرير وهذه الارض إلنا، واليهود مش راح يضلوا على هذه الارض. انا بقول لهم انهم يرجعوا من حيث اتوا، اطلعوا قبل ما نبيدكم، واحنا راح نحرر هذه الارض. اذا مات شهيد راح يجي بداله 1000 شهيد. الله اكبر الله اكبر الله اكبر.
أعد جيلا يحمل هذا السيف ليضرب به العدو.
At the summer camps, UNRWA youngsters learned to view the United States and Israel as the devil, the ultimate enemy. They trampled on the flags of both nations and set them afire.
سنعمل أن تستمر جدوى الصراع حتى يوقن بأنه لا مجال له إلا الرحيل.
جايين اليوم احنا عند مخيمات سيف القدس اقترب الوعد، حتى نبني اجسامنا واجسادنا، حتى نقهر بني صهيون ونرجع على اراضينا المحتله.
كان اليهود ما لهمش قيمه هنا، يعني ما لهمش ارض. نتدرب نجاهد في سبيل الله، وهذا نستشهد ان شاء الله في سبيل الله.
تكبير تكبير.
حلمي انه اطلع اني يعني اصير دكتور ومقاوم، يعني علم مع جهاد في سبيل الله، وعشان نحرر فلسطين ونطهرها من اليهود، من الاحتلال الصهيوني المجرم.
مفيش حاجة اسمها دولة إسرائيل أصلا عشان يكون لهم عاصمة قبل كل شيء. إذا القدس عاصمة فلسطين الأبدية.
They learned how to use automatic weapons of all kinds. Instructors taught them how to assemble each weapon, hold it correctly, and operate it.
أول إشي تدريب، أول إشي يعلمونا طريقة اسم السلاح وفك السلاح وكيف تنظيف. ثاني إشي طريقة حمل السلاح. ثالث إشي عندك التدريب القوي، بدك من تحت الزحف تدريب. ثالث إشي إن نحمل وكيف نطخ لقدام، نتعلم كيف نطخ ونصوب الأهداف القريبة، ونتعلم على الأسلحة بأنواعها. المدربين ما شاء الله عليهم هان بيعلموا كل أنواع الأسلحة هان.
The terrorists working as camp instructors provided them with detailed descriptions of the mortars used by Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and even of the tanks used by the Israel Defense Forces. The UNRWA youngsters practiced fighting in built-up areas as well as commandeering a vehicle.
احنا ما بنقدر نحرر الا بالسلاح، زي ما هم بحاربونا بالسلاح احنا حنحرر بالسلاح. هي هيك المعادله، ما بيفهموا الا بلغه السلاح.
One exercise featured a mock-up of an Israeli tank. The idea was to teach the children how to sneak up on a tank and kidnap Israeli soldiers.
عشان هيك احنا بنحارب وبنتعلم من الصغر. عشان ايش؟ عشان لما نكبر نبقى مستعدين لمقاتلة اليهود وتطردهم من البلد، لانه هذه مش بلدهم، يرجعوا بلدهم. هذه مش بلدهم، هذه بلدنا. لما اكبر بدي استشهد واعمل عمليات مدافع عن وطني وعن ارضي، هذه فلسطين. انا والله نفسي استشهد.
حط السيف قبال السيف، واحنا رجال محمد ضيف.
نعلمهم فن القتال مع هذا العدو المغتصب الذي اغتصب أرضنا، فنحن سنعد هذا الجيل ومن أجل أن نفجر جماجم هذا العدو.
من تحت الأرض نخرج إليكم، ندق الرعب في قلوبكم، ومن فوق الأرض بصواريخنا نقطعكم أشلاء أشلاء.
Top commanders from Hamas and Islamic Jihad were in charge of the military training and stated clearly that the goal was for the youngsters to take part in the future battle against Israel.
الكبار أرضعوا الصغار حب الوطن وحب الجهاد وحب الاستشهاد.
داعي داعي
The children attending the summer camps were taught about their so-called inalienable right of return to cities inside Israel, such as Jaffa, Lod, Haifa, Beersheba, Ashdod, and Ashkelon. With these cities just kilometers away, they were told that a return was literally in reach.
إن شاء الله بدنا نرجع وإن شاء الله كل كتاب القسم حيكونوا معنا لأنه هذه بلدتنا الأصلية رح نحررها غصب عنه.
أن الاحتلال الصهيوني طرد أبائنا وأجدادنا من أجلنا لنضحي في دمنا ونرجع حيفا والجاهد بالجهاد.
نحن نساء الجهاد ضد الشهادة دربنا.
Girls affiliated with Islamic Jihad happily recited the mantras of terror. They are an integral part of the movement, meant to show that terrorism is not a male-dominated system.
لابد لنا أن نقوم ببناء جيل قرآني واعي. لابد لنا كأمهات فلسطينيات أن نرسل أبناؤنا إلى هذه الأماكن لنزرع فيهم حب البلاد، حب فلسطين، حب الجهاد.
لابد أن كل امرأة منا تكون أم الشهيد، أخت الشهيد، يعني نزيد الوعي الثقافي عند أبنائنا حتى يجي يوم وهذه الأطفال يصير يعني مقاومة وتصير تدافع هي عن الأرض ونرجعها إلنا.
The women of Islamic Jihad bestowed the legacy of their cause on the next generation. Notably, the summer camps featured the photos of female suicide bombers who blew themselves up to murder Jews.
أنا بلدة الأصلية بلدة يبنى حنعود عليها بالحجر والسكينة.
هم أصلا أعداء ويهود، هم من هم اليهود؟ هم طبعا قبائل تجمعت من كل دول العالم وأجهد كونوا لهم وطن كما يدعون لهم في فلسطين.
حط السيف في قبال السيف، حط السيف في قبال السيف، احنا رجال محمد ضيف، احنا رجال محمد ضيف.
As the summer camps drew to a close, each camper received a certificate of appreciation complete with his photo, attesting to the completion of formal weapons training and a readiness to fight the Jews. For the UNRWA students, these photos depicted them with automatic weapons and showed them imbued with ideological motivation.
الذين يشبهون المجاهدين في أعمالهم ويتشبهون بهم وهم مجاهدون المستقبل بإذن الله.
Clearly, the Hamas and Islamic Jihad summer camps have become training grounds for the vilification of Israel. UNRWA teachers and textbooks complement this with an ideology and curriculum that promotes armed struggle for the right of return. Last May, the most recent outbreak of anti-Israel violence in Gaza exposed a tunnel dug by Hamas under a school in UNRWA's Zaytun refugee camp. Here is the evidence. Hamas thus takes the UNRWA children captive not only during the summer, but during the school year itself. UNRWA students constitute a future terror army aimed at liquidating Israel based on the illusion of a right of return. UNRWA can no longer act as if it does not know. UNRWA is proud of its 400 schools in Gaza, Judea and Samaria, and Jerusalem. It allocates 58% of its budget for an education system that indoctrinates a new generation for war. In essence, it has abandoned its students. The time has come for UNRWA to teach peace and coexistence during both the school year and summer vacation. The time has come for the world to demand oversight of UNRWA schools. The time has come for donor nations to put an end to UNRWA anarchy.
أنا اسمي أبو الديب، صف سادس، عمر 12. يافا.
أنا اسمي حمزة بوهين من بلد برير.
اسمي قصاية عمري 13 سنة من المجد.
أنا من بلدة حمامة اسمي خالد.
أنا اسمي آسر البيك من بلدة هربيا.
شمس يوسف ياسين من حيفا.
اسمي عاصم فرج من الشجاعية وأصلي من بئر السبع.
أنا اسمي براب سكران عمري 15 سنة أنا أصلي من المجدان.
عبد الله 9 يافا.
محمد عبد الله سليم 13 سنة بئر السبع.
فايز عبد الكريم مصباح الداية 12 من حيفا.
أنا اسمي أسماء الجرا. أنا بلدة الأصلية بلدة يبنى.
اسمي فداء أبو طيور لاجئة أصل من بلدة سرفند العمار.
Thank you for watching. In case you have any questions, there's a chat room. Please write your questions down. We'll relate to those questions very, very soon. One obvious question is, how did we get these films? You look on our site, you'll see that we've been doing this for quite a number of years with Arab television crews that are based in the UNRWA camps. They're professional television crews who basically work on the issue of filming the area they live in, the UNRWA refugee camps that they live in. These are refugee camps that may not be called camps. They're more like facilities which serve the people who left Israel in 1948 and have been there in temporary conditions since that time. We're now going to turn before we open up to questions and also to one of our participants, we're going to ask to say a few things. We'll ask Dr. Arnon Gross, who has had the opportunity to examine 1,000 school books that the Palestinian Authority has provided for UNRWA, to talk about one of the most important themes of UNRWA, which he will introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you for your attendance, everybody. Good afternoon. I would like to sum up the fundamentals of the Palestinian curriculum taught in UNRWA schools in 3 fundamentals. The first one is the legitimization of Israel and the very presence of the Jews in this country, including ultimate denial of their history and the existence of the holy places there. They say it is said that these are Muslim holy places taken over by Jews. The second fundamental is demonization of both Jews and Israel, and Jews are depicted as enemies of Islam, enemies of all the prophets, and enemies of God himself, and therefore in a traditional society they deserve death, actually. Now, the third fundamental is the absence of any advocacy of peaceful resolution of the conflict and any advocacy of coexistence with Israel. Instead, we find something else. Let's begin with the issue of peace in the Palestinian curriculum used in UNRWA. There is only one reference to peace between Israel and the Palestinians in a history textbook which presents a letter signed by Yasser Arafat and sent to late Premier Rabin at the eve of the signing of the Oslo Accords in 1993, in which he recognizes Israel's right to live in peace and security and renounces terror. This is the only reference to the issue of peace with Israel as something part of history. It is not an advocacy of peace and coexistence. And instead, we find actually lots of examples that say the opposite. Let's move over, please. Instead of peace and coexistence, we find a violent struggle for the liberation of Palestine, not restricted by the 67 lines. Please. This is, for example, the Palestinian Authority's national anthem, which is taught in class in school. This is for grade 3, and it is full of violent expressions, revenge, weapons fire, and shall die as a fidai. Fidai is actually self-sacrificing person. This is an Islamic term, and it used today to denote the members of Palestinian terrorist groups. And I shall die as a fidai until I return to the homeland, actually. Next, please. And this is how the liberation struggle is depicted to grade 1 students. War, not peaceful resolution of the conflict. Next, please. This is sort of an anthem of the youth movement of the Fatah organization, not Hamas, Fatah. And it says that the areas of Haifa and Jaffa, which are in first 67 borders or territories of the state of Israel, are to be liberated too, not just Nablus and Hebron and Gaza. So this is part of the violent liberation struggle. Next, please. And you can see that in this particular example, this is a language exercise. We say it would be appropriate for Jaffa to return to our Basra. حرى جافا أن تعود لأحضاننا. Next, please. And this is an item sold to tourists in Bethlehem, and it presents the map of the whole country with the colors of the Palestinian flag, and it says Free Palestine, which means that there is no room for Israel in Free Palestine. This is for grade 3 as well. Right of return. According to Resolution 194 of the UN in 1948, those refugees who wish that could return to their former places of residence on condition that they would live in peace with their neighbors. But this is not so in this particular item. Rather than returning to Israel, they are returning to liberated Palestine to hoist the flag of Palestine on the liberated territories. And there is another example. Next, please. And this is part of a poem. I shall retrieve it as a precious and sovereign homeland. It is not Israel, it's Palestine to which I return. Grade 5. Terror is part and parcel of the liberation struggle. This is the first page out of 4, exalting the female commander of the terrorist action or terrorist attack on an Israeli civilian bus in 1978, in which over 30 persons, 38 exactly, I think, men, women, and children were butchered by the terrorists. And this is part of the liberation struggle. Now, the liberation struggle is also religious because they talk about jihad, they talk about martyrdom, shahada, they talk about the need to liberate Al-Aqsa Mosque from the infidels, from the devil's aids, and so on. So the student who comes from a traditional society learns that the Jews are enemies of God, enemies of Islam, they must be fought against, and this is the way, by way of jihad and martyrdom. Next, please. And this is a poem for grade 3, which says what should be done. Actually, it hints to the question or the issue, what should be done with the surviving Jews after the liberation of Palestine? And I would say, قسما سأضحي بدمائي لأروي أرض الكرماء وأزيل الغصب, that's Israel, the usurper, من بلدي وأبيد فلول الغرباء, and to exterminate the defeated remnants of the foreigners. So this is part and parcel of the liberation struggle, and it is sung in class. Luckily for all, under pressure probably from the European Union or from UNRWA or from other, that particular song was omitted from the textbooks in the 2020 edition. They replaced it with some other piece which does not contain the expression of extermination. So this is sort of a progress, I would say, due to our efforts, I believe. But I wonder if they still sing that song in class. It has a melody, and they are quite enthusiastic about singing that song. To sum up, I would say, please move on. Now, the Palestinian Authority textbooks used by UNRWA in its schools delegitimize the existence of the State of Israel, a full member state of the United Nations organization, and the very presence in the country of its 6 million Jewish citizens whose history and holy places there are denied. The PA school books used by UNRWA demonized both Israel and the Jews to the point of sheer anti-Semitism. And the books never advocate a peaceful resolution or solution to the present Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Instead, they call for a violent struggle for liberation, which is not limited by the 67 lines, in which terror plays a central part. Being a UN agency, UNRWA is committed to neutrality and peace, but its use of such school books contradicts that commitment and makes UNRWA a full accomplice in the PA anti-Semitic indoctrination. Moreover, UNRWA betrays its sacred obligation towards the well-being of Palestinians' children under its care and youth by preparing them for war against their Israeli counterparts. This kind of education, quote unquote, should stop immediately, and the donor states should have a say in this matter. The sooner, the better. Thank you very much.
And I will present now the video you requested. Arnon, could you remind us what are they saying?
This is the part. وأبيد فلول الغرباء. This is the part. Thank you very much.
I'm just going to ask Dr. Gross. I should have done this at the beginning. Just tell a little bit about yourself and your background, and then we're going to go on to something else. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm a scholar of Middle Eastern Studies. I have a PhD degree from Princeton University in that particular issue or subject. I have also an MPA degree from Harvard, Kennedy School of Government. I'm a retired journalist. I worked almost 40 years at Israel's Arabic radio, where I've acquired some more experience about Middle Eastern affairs. And since 2000, I've been working and researching school books of various Middle Eastern curricula regarding the attitude to the other and to peace, including the Palestinian Authority school books beginning in 2000. And I've seen over 1,000 books of all this curricula, and I've presented my scientific findings to policy makers, US Congress, the UN, British Parliament, European Parliament, the French Parliament, Canadian, Swedish Parliament, the Israeli Knesset, and also to think tanks, research institutions, and people of the press.
Thank you, Dr. Gross. We've had a couple of questions on the chat, and we're going to have someone speak in a moment. One of the questions was, has the Swedish government responded to our questions about this, whether Sweden is reviewing the curriculum? The answer is no. Have we seen any response? And the summary of the EU review of the school books. We have seen press references to it, but the EU hasn't sent it to us. Another very important question asked, will UNRWA be discussed during Prime Minister Bennett's visit in Washington? We do not know. We've asked that question. The more people ask that question, the better. It's very important. And now I want to turn the floor over to one of our participants this evening. We're very pleased to hear it's evening where we are. Baroness Ruth Deitch, who is a member of the British House of Lords, and the Great Britain is the #2 funder of UNRWA right now, and at the level of $64 million, the equivalent of $64 million a year. And Baroness Deitch is very concerned about this issue from the 2 conversations I've had with her. Let me hear your perspective of this film and of this issue with the new school year beginning next week. Thank you, Baroness Deitch.
The timing of this particular seminar is very appropriate and coincidental. It coincides, of course, with the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the terrible humanitarian situation, the denial of human rights happening there. It also coincides with the day, a few days ago, the International Day for commemorating the victims of acts of violence. Now, in that case, I participated in a seminar. I raised the issue of UNRWA, but it was ignored, as all issues Jewish are ignored. Now, in relation to Afghanistan, I have to say that we here in Britain, and I think in the whole of Europe, are absolutely dismayed, to put it mildly, by the actions of President Biden. I don't know how many Americans are watching this presentation, and I'm sure I will offend them, but we find him ignorant, incompetent, and damaging. And my real fear is that if, heaven forbid, Israel was ever in trouble, there is no way that we could count on America. And the lack of reliability of America in its present administration can only heat up the tensions in the Middle East. Because Biden has not only restored funding to UNRWA, Trump, for all his faults, did stop it. America has provided $33 million since May and restored previous funding. The European Union is providing 157 million euros a year, and the British sum you mentioned already. Biden has returned America to that dreadful sink of corruption, the United Nations Human Rights Council, and of course he is funding UNRWA and the Palestinian Authority. And until that administration ends, we are in greater danger than ever before, because no one dares say anything about the links between the Taliban and Hamas in Gaza. They are very much brothers under the skin. Israel is facing something very much like normal civilized people are facing in Afghanistan. The film you showed, I think, exemplifies what happens if you have a people with no history. The way that the Palestinians, so-called, are trying to give their children a background in history is by imbuing them with a story of loss and hatred, because there is no history that they can be taught going back 200 or 300 years. There was no Palestinian state. So it's all being invented for the sake of tomorrow. Now, not only are there blatant breaches of children's rights, as you saw in the video, but let me draw your attention to all the other articles of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which are being broken quite visibly in that video. It says in Article 14 that although children have a right to have freedom of religion and belief, they must not do so in a way that prevents others. Now, those children are clearly setting out to prevent the freedom of belief and religion of Jewish children. Ditto association in Article 15. In Article 19, it says children should be protected from all forms of violence. Article 36, children should not be exploited for political activities. Article 38, children under 15 should not take part in war or join the army. So what I want, and I will continue to press here, is that nations should cut off funding to UNRWA. It's time for UNRWA to come to an end. It should be folded in with the United Nations Refugee Commission, which is busy. After all, what's the point when the world is full of millions of refugees of all sorts, of having a special agency just taking care of Palestinians? And if you accept the Palestinian narrative, children living in Gaza are not refugees. They're living in their own territory. Children living in the West Bank are not refugees. They're living in their own territory. They're no more refugees than I am a refugee from, say, Poland. So I think the pressure has to be, first of all, on President Biden. And surely the Jewish voters who support the Democrats, and I know Jewish voters are not one bloc, it's time for them to start using whatever leverage they have on Biden to reverse the funding of UNRWA, to try and stop UNRWA existing, to stop the funding of the Palestinian Authority, to speak up for Israel in the United Nations Human Rights Council, because America has taken several dreadful steps backwards from the time under Trump. I know Trump was full of faults. I quite understand that. I understand that people voted for Biden because he wasn't Trump. But from the Israeli point of view, from a children's rights point of view, the USA has taken a step backwards. I'm doing my best with some others in the United Kingdom, but I have to say, without much result so far. So I rest my case there.
The question was asked of one of our participants, what is the best way to press for a change in UNRWA policy?
No, press for a change in what?
UNRWA policy.
Well, I've asked the government, our government, repeatedly to hold UNRWA to account for its textbooks. The European Union carried out a study of the textbooks. Now, I don't know, and I will look it up after the seminar, which states are represented on the governance or the governing body of UNRWA, but those are the states we need to get to. Presenting your video, keeping up that pressure. I would also like to find out who can enforce the United Nations covenant on the rights of children in relation to Palestinian children. But we need to get into who is funding and who is governing UNRWA.
The question was asked, which I'd like to relate to, how we reverse the process of brainwashing of children from this generation, and how do we move on? What I see, I happen to be a trained social work professional, and one of the differences I see since I began working in this area is that the children were taught absolute hatred. Now it's more regimented war, regimented violence. So it's a step beyond hatred. The question, again, how to reverse this process is not easy. And but the most important thing is, as the Baroness Dietsch is suggesting, is working through UN bodies, but also through the donor nations. The donor nations appear on our website, which is israelbehindthenews.com, and also UNRWA-monitor.com. And we found a certain sense of responsiveness, not enough responsiveness, but the more that people stay with it, the better. All I can say is next week, the school year begins again, only next week. And the more that you pay the people who are watching this film, and of course we're going to be circulating it, the more people monitor this as they find out what is happening in the schools in the first week of school. They look at the curriculum, which is on top of our website, UNRWA-monitor.com. You'll see the curriculum right there. And our search for any mention of peace has not come up with anything. By the way, I want to say something very clear about the Biden administration. The Biden administration presented criteria, very strong criteria for oversight, for supervision, for change in the UNRWA education, for a no tolerance policy of incitement. On July 14th, UNRWA signed a deal, an accord with the United States against incitement. And 2 weeks later, a journalist asked the spokesman of UNRWA, well, what about changing the books? And the answer was, the books don't belong to us. We can't change them. So much for that agreement. But at least one thing I must say in a positive note is that the Biden administration at least said they want an anti-incitement agenda. And in following through on that, since the Democrats do have the majority in Congress, this is a light which we can relate to, we can look at. So that's what I can say.
Can I add 2 points there? One is that Biden has also just recently asked the Taliban to give undertakings about human rights and escape from the airport. And the whole world knows that this is not worth the paper that it's written on. It really amounts to nothing. The other thing you have to note, and I think probably the participants today come from many parts of the world, that the hate ideology of the Taliban, of the children in Gaza, is taught in schools around the world if those schools are not registered. We have in the United Kingdom, unfortunately, a rather free regime in relation to children's schools. And one of the other things I'm trying to do is to make sure that children are not taken out of school and nobody finds what happened to them, and that unregistered, often religious schools, are brought into state supervision. Those unregistered schools include madrasas, where I'm very worried that children are taught the same sort of thing. I have to say, to be fair, that the unregistered schools also comprise very, very orthodox Jewish schools, where children are taught in Yiddish and Hebrew and don't learn any skills that fit them for the modern world as well. So I think it is right for all of us to keep an eye on what is being taught in our varying nations' schools, and that who are the children who are not getting a proper state education.
I'd like to conclude the discussion this evening with the policy changes, policy challenges to UNRWA, which our agency has been focused on and which everyone here can take a look at. This is also on our website, IsraelBehindTheNews.com and UNRWAMonitor.com. These are 6 very doable principles that complement the UNRWA, the United Nations principles. 1, canceling the curriculum. 2, ceasing military training. By the way, we've asked the question of UNRWA donors, the donor nations, will you demand an inspection of the UNRWA schools to demilitarize them? Number 3, insist that UNRWA dismiss employees who are members of terrorist organizations. Number 4, insist that UNRWA cancel its contract with their youth ambassador, Muhammad Asaf, who travels the world and promotes violence. Number 5, very important, ask for an audit of donor funds to UNRWA. Why does UNRWA insist on getting cash from many of the donor nations, which may wind up in the hands of Gaza terror groups and in the hands of organized crime? And last but not least, we must, as Baroness Deesh hinted, we must introduce UNHCR standards, that's the United Nations High Commission for Refugees standards, to UNRWA, to advance the resettlement of Arab refugees after 67 years. Current policy of UNRWA is that refugee resettlement would interfere with the right of return to Arab villages that existed before 48. How many people realize that 82% of the people who live in UNRWA in Gaza are actually living in UNRWA camps, which is a prescription for incitement, suffering, and continuing the war. So these are the conclusions we're sharing with you. A week from now, a week from tonight, we're going to have a follow-up Zoom seminar on the subject of the UNRWA accord that was reached with the United States, and we'll go into the very, very carefully worded accord, which so far UNRWA has been ignoring. So all I can say is there are many people from both sides of the aisle in the U.S. and what I've seen in the European Union and in the Great Britain are very concerned, and the issue of monitoring UNRWA, keeping UNRWA's feet to the fire, this is what we're talking about. And all I can say is the theme of all United Nations schools is peace starts here. Well, the time has come to apply that to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Thank you for participating in this discussion, to be continued in a week from now, and I have your addresses, and we'll send you all a update about the August 31st session, which will take place a week from today, 3 years to the day after the United States cut off UNRWA, and the questions of what conditions it will continue in the new school year. Thank you and good night, or good afternoon.